You've always felt like you were carrying a weight that wasn't entirely yours. That's because you are. You aren't just fighting for your own peace. You are at war with toxic cycles that have haunted your bloodline for generations. You are the designated cycle breaker, and hell is terrified because you're actually winning. That exhaustion you've been feeling was never just ordinary stress. It was spiritual pressure. Because people who are chosen to break generational cycles often carry battles that started long before they were born. You walked into family systems filled with pain you did not create, dysfunction you did not choose, and emotional wounds that were already waiting for you before you even understood what was happening. And somehow, you were expected to survive all of it while pretending everything was normal. You noticed patterns other people ignored. The manipulation, the emotional instability, the silence around trauma, the toxic loyalty systems that punished truth and rewarded dysfunction. Even as a child, something inside your spirit knew this environment was not healthy. But that awareness came with a cost. Because once a chosen one begins seeing clearly, they can no longer comfortably participate in the cycle. That is why your journey has felt heavier than the people around you seem to understand. You were not just trying to heal yourself. You were unknowingly confronting inherited pain that had been passed from generation to generation, like an invisible curse nobody wanted to name. And the moment you started questioning those patterns, resistance appeared. Suddenly you became difficult. Too sensitive. Too different. But the truth is, your spirit was never designed to normalize dysfunction. You were assigned to interrupt it. That is why your path required so much isolation, discernment, and emotional endurance. Because cycle breakers are rarely born into peaceful environments. They are born into battlegrounds. And despite everything designed to break you, you are still here. That alone is proof your assignment is bigger than you realize. The battle did not start with you. That is one of the most painful realizations a chosen one eventually comes to understand. The emotional chaos, the instability, the unhealthy patterns, the constant survival mode, none of it appeared randomly in your lifetime. These cycles were already moving through the bloodline long before your name was ever spoken. You simply became the first person willing to confront them. In many families, dysfunction becomes tradition. Narcissism gets disguised as authority. Emotional neglect becomes normal parenting. Poverty mindsets get passed down as fear-based survival strategies. Addiction becomes an escape route nobody talks about openly. Manipulation becomes communication. Silence becomes protection. And generation after generation, people adapt to the dysfunction so deeply that they stop recognizing it as destructive. But your spirit recognized it immediately. Even when you could not fully explain why certain behaviors felt wrong, something inside you resisted becoming emotionally numb. You questioned things others accepted without hesitation. You felt disturbed by patterns everybody else learned to tolerate. You carried an inner discomfort that made it impossible to fully merge with the dysfunction surrounding you. That was not rebellion. That was discernment. And that discernment frightened people around you more than they admitted. Because cycle breakers unintentionally expose what entire family systems are desperately trying to avoid confronting. Your awareness became a mirror. Your healing journey became evidence that change was possible. Your refusal to normalize toxicity disrupted the emotional structure many people built their identities around. That is why your path became so difficult. Not because you were weak, but because inherited dysfunction defends itself aggressively when someone finally challenges it. Families trapped in toxic cycles often protect familiarity more than truth. Even painful patterns feel safe when they have existed for generations. So the moment you started setting boundaries, questioning manipulation, refusing emotional abuse, or choosing healing over loyalty to dysfunction, resistance intensified. Some people accused you of changing. Others claimed you were abandoning the family. Some tried to guilt you back into unhealthy dynamics. Others minimized your pain entirely because acknowledging your experience would force them to confront wounds they spent their whole lives avoiding. And deep down, many of them feared your freedom, because your healing exposed the possibility that they could have healed too. Read that again. That is why cycle breakers often become misunderstood inside their own bloodline. You represented disruption, transformation, accountability, and unhealthy systems rarely welcome the person sent to dismantle them. But here is what you must understand. You were chosen for this battle because your spirit was strong enough to survive seeing the truth without becoming consumed by it. While others adapted to dysfunction, your soul kept searching for peace. While others repeated toxic patterns automatically, something inside you kept resisting, even when it exhausted you, even when it isolated you, even when it made you feel alone inside your own family. Because your assignment was never to preserve the cycle. It was to end it. And every painful moment that forced you to develop discernment, emotional awareness, and spiritual strength was preparing you for that mission long before you realized it yourself. One of the hardest parts of being a cycle breaker is realizing the greatest resistance often comes from your own bloodline. Not strangers, not enemies outside the home, but the very people who should have understood your pain the most. That confusion cuts deep. Because part of you kept hoping that if you explained yourself clearly enough, loved hard enough, stayed patient enough, eventually they would understand why you needed distance from the dysfunction. You hoped honesty would create healing. You hoped truth would bring clarity. But unhealthy family systems do not always respond well to awakening. Sometimes they respond with resistance. Because the moment you stopped playing the role assigned to you, the emotional balance of the system started shifting. People who benefited from silence became uncomfortable with your honesty. People who relied on control became threatened by your boundaries. People who normalized chaos became irritated by your peace. And suddenly, the family member trying to heal became treated like the problem. That was never an accident. Toxic systems survive by protecting patterns, not people. So when a chosen one begins breaking generational behaviors, the system often reacts as though it is under attack. Guilt gets weaponized. Your intentions get twisted. Your growth gets mocked. Your boundaries get labeled selfishness. Because if they can convince you that healing is betrayal, they can pull you back into the cycle. And for a while, some of those attacks hurt more than you admitted. Being misunderstood by strangers is painful. Being misunderstood by your own family touches something far deeper. It creates an emotional loneliness that is difficult to explain to people who have never experienced it. You start questioning yourself, wondering if maybe you really are too sensitive. Maybe your memories are exaggerated. Maybe your need for peace is somehow wrong. That self-doubt is exactly what toxic cycles depend on, because confused people are easier to control. But even while doubting yourself, your spirit kept noticing the same patterns repeating over and over again. The manipulation, the emotional inconsistency, the guilt tactics, the refusal to take accountability. The way truth was constantly rewritten to protect appearances. And eventually you realized something painful. Some people would rather protect dysfunction than confront it. That realization changes you forever. Because once you understand that not everyone wants healing, you stop exhausting yourself trying to save people committed to remaining the same. You begin protecting your peace instead of sacrificing it to maintain unhealthy loyalty systems. And that shift terrifies toxic people. The moment you stopped begging for understanding, they lost emotional access to your spirit. The moment you stopped shrinking yourself to keep others comfortable, the control started weakening. The moment you chose healing over dysfunction, the old cycle began losing power over your life. That is why some relatives became distant. Some became hostile. Some quietly turned others against you. Not because your spirit was evil, but because your transformation exposed everything they were still avoiding within themselves. Read that again. Your healing became confrontation without you even speaking. And despite all the pressure to return to old patterns, something inside you kept moving forward anyway. Even through loneliness, even through grief, even through the pain of realizing that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most threatened by your freedom. That strength is not ordinary. That is the strength of a true cycle breaker. There is a kind of loneliness that only cycle breakers understand. It is the loneliness of becoming someone your environment never prepared you to be. Because when you are the first person in a bloodline trying to build emotional health, spiritual awareness, and inner peace from scratch, there is rarely a roadmap waiting for you. Most of the time, you are learning while grieving, healing while exhausted, growing while carrying the emotional weight of generations that never learned how to process pain properly. That is the pain of the pioneer. You had to teach yourself things nobody taught you: emotional regulation, boundaries, self-worth, discernment, healthy love. You had to unlearn survival patterns that were normalized around you for years. And while other people inherited emotional support systems, you often inherited confusion, silence, or instability instead. That creates a deep internal exhaustion. Because part of your journey involved mourning the version of family, safety, and emotional security you deserved, but did not fully receive. And many cycle breakers carry guilt for even admitting that pain out loud. You were taught to minimize your wounds, to stay grateful no matter what happened, to protect family images at the expense of your own emotional reality. But suppressed pain does not disappear. It waits, and eventually your spirit reaches a breaking point where silence becomes more damaging than truth. That moment changes everything. Because once you begin confronting reality honestly, you can no longer comfortably pretend dysfunction is love. You can no longer sacrifice your peace just to maintain appearances. You can no longer keep abandoning yourself to preserve systems that were slowly destroying your spirit. Still, the path was never easy. There were moments you questioned whether healing was worth the isolation. Moments you wondered if returning to old patterns would at least make you feel less alone. Moments where the emotional weight became so heavy that even getting through the day felt exhausting. And the hardest part? Most people around you could not fully understand what you were carrying. They saw your boundaries, but not the years of pain that created them. They saw your distance, but not the emotional survival behind it. They saw your transformation, but not the silent battles required to achieve it. So you often healed in private, cried in private, questioned yourself in private, built yourself back together in private. That is what pioneers do. Because when nobody around you has modeled healthy emotional behavior, every step toward healing feels uncertain at first. You become the experiment, the first blueprint, the first person in the line willing to choose awareness over denial. And that responsibility can feel overwhelming. Sometimes you wondered why the burden landed on you specifically, why you had to carry so much emotional labor while others stayed comfortably asleep inside familiar dysfunction, why your spirit had to endure the loneliness of becoming different while others remained accepted simply for staying the same. But here is the truth your pain has been preparing you to understand. The pioneer always walks through isolation before the path becomes visible for others. Read that again. Your struggle was never meaningless. Every boundary you learned to set, every unhealthy pattern you refused to repeat, every moment you chose healing over emotional chaos was creating a new possibility for the generations coming after you. That is why your journey required such enormous spiritual strength. You were not merely surviving life. You were rewriting inheritance. And even when nobody applauded your growth, even when family misunderstood you, even when loneliness made you question yourself, your spirit kept evolving anyway. Because deep down, something greater was guiding you forward. Something ancient. Something protective. Something that understood the bloodline could not continue repeating the same suffering forever. And you were the one chosen to interrupt it. What if I told you that not every ancestor is against you? What if the very people in your bloodline who once suffered silently, who never got the chance to heal, who carried pain they could not escape, are now spiritually standing behind you, hoping you succeed where they could not? Because that is the part many cycle breakers fail to realize during the hardest moments of the journey. You are not walking alone. Yes, there were inherited wounds passed through the bloodline. Yes, there were destructive patterns repeated for generations. But buried beneath all of that pain are souls who secretly prayed for someone strong enough to finally end the cycle. People who endured emotional suppression, abuse, poverty, addiction, fear, or silence without ever having the tools to break free themselves. And now your spirit is doing what they could not do in their lifetime. That matters more than you realize. Because every time you choose healing over dysfunction, you create spiritual movement throughout the entire bloodline. Every boundary you establish weakens patterns that once controlled generations. Every moment you choose peace instead of chaos becomes evidence that the cycle is finally losing power. And whether you fully understand it or not, there is unseen support surrounding that mission. That is why certain moments in your life felt impossible to explain logically. The strange protection during your lowest seasons. The sudden intuition warning you before destructive situations unfolded. The inner strength that kept pushing you forward even after betrayal, exhaustion, and emotional isolation nearly broke you. Something kept carrying you. Something kept whispering, "Do not give up now." Because healed energy within the bloodline recognizes what you are doing. The ancestors who wanted freedom but never found it recognize your courage. The ones who silently suffered recognize the importance of your resistance. And spiritually, they are cheering for every step you take away from inherited pain. Let that sink in. You are becoming the answered prayer of people you may never even fully know. That is why the opposition around your healing journey became so intense. Breaking cycles affects more than one individual life. It changes the emotional future of entire generations. And whenever deep transformation begins happening inside a bloodline, resistance naturally appears because old systems fight desperately to survive. But so does protection. That is the balance many people overlook. For every force trying to pull you backward, there is also unseen strength pushing you forward. For every moment darkness tried convincing you to quit, there was also spiritual support helping you survive long enough to become who you were meant to become. And now you are beginning to see the evidence. You think differently. You love differently. You handle conflict differently. You recognize manipulation faster. You value peace more deeply. That transformation did not happen accidentally. It happened because your spirit accepted the assignment. And even though the process wounded you at times, it also awakened something powerful inside you. Discernment strong enough to protect future generations from repeating the same suffering. That is legacy work. Not money alone. Not status alone. But emotional freedom. Spiritual clarity. A healthier foundation for the people who will come after you. And somewhere beyond what your physical eyes can see, the healed parts of your bloodline are finally breathing with relief. Because after generations of silence, somebody finally stood up and said, "This pain will not continue through me." That declaration changed everything. What you are building now is bigger than survival. You are creating a completely new blueprint. For generations, your bloodline may have operated through fear, silence, emotional suppression, manipulation, instability, or survival-based thinking. Many people inherited pain without ever learning how to transform it. The cycle simply repeated itself because nobody showed them another way. But you did something different. You stopped blindly inheriting dysfunction and started questioning it. That single decision altered the future. Because now the generations after you will inherit something your ancestors rarely experienced: awareness, emotional honesty, boundaries, discernment, a healthier understanding of love, a new standard for peace. Do you understand how powerful that is? You are not just healing your own wounds. You are preventing future wounds from being created. Every unhealthy pattern you refuse to normalize becomes protection for the people connected to your future. Every boundary you learn to set teaches future generations that love should not require self-destruction. Every moment you chose emotional growth over inherited chaos weakened cycles that once seemed permanent. That is victory, not perfection, not becoming emotionally untouched, but refusing to pass suffering forward. And yes, the journey cost you deeply. There were relationships you outgrew, versions of yourself you had to grieve, lonely seasons where it felt like nobody understood the magnitude of what you were carrying. But despite all of that, your spirit kept choosing transformation over familiarity. Because deep down, you understood something essential. Temporary loneliness is better than lifelong bondage to dysfunction. Read that again. Many people stay trapped inside toxic cycles simply because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. But chosen ones are called to build what they never received. That is why your path demanded courage most people around you could not understand. And now the results are becoming visible. Your mind is clearer. Your discernment is stronger. Your spirit is no longer starving for validation from people committed to misunderstanding you. You are learning how to protect your peace without apologizing for it. You are learning how to love without abandoning yourself. You are learning that healing does not require everyone's approval. That realization is freedom. And one day, the people who come after you may never fully understand how much you sacrificed to create that freedom for them. They may never see the nights you spent rebuilding yourself emotionally. They may never realize how many painful patterns ended because you refused to repeat them. But they will live inside the healthier reality your courage created. That is the reward of the cycle breaker. You became the interruption, the turning point, the new beginning your bloodline desperately needed. And because you chose healing, the future will never look the same again. So if nobody has told you this lately, hear it now. What you survived was not small. Breaking generational cycles requires enormous spiritual strength, emotional endurance, and sacrifice that most people will never fully understand. But your decision to heal instead of repeat the pain has already changed more lives than you can currently see. Keep going, chosen one. And if this message spoke directly to your spirit, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment. The cycle ends with me. Stay strong, stay protected, and never forget why you were chosen.